In that particular scenario, these professionals, and granted, you're right, we have people from all walks of life, we have professionals, we have people in the medical profession, educators, blue collar, that benefit from the same bankruptcy process. But in this particular case, we're talking about a Chapter 13. It would allow them breathing room. It would allow them up to 5 years to pay based on their disposable income on the arrears, making they would still have to make their minimum monthly payment on the mortgage, but part of that extra disposable income is going to go towards the creditors, and it goes in order of priority. The first priority is going to be the mortgage, because that's really the most important portion. So within the next 5 years, by the end of the 5-year plan, if the plan was successful, they would have caught up on their mortgage. Any particular debt, I'm talking about dischargeable debts, unsecured debts, credit card debts, medical bills. If there was insufficient income to pay all of these debts, and they obtained the Chapter 13 discharge, then those debts are wiped away.
Well, you brought up an interesting point that I think the consumers out there, and by the way, Mr. Gonzalez's number will appear on the screen, plus his email, but if you want to say it, because sometimes I play this on radio, what's your number in case they have some general questions?
Sure. You can contact me at 361-887-6363.
And that number is 887-6363. How about an email? Do you ever read your emails? I know I do all the time.
We're living in the 21st century.
I know,
you can't live without
email.
Hide. Sure, if you want to contact me by email, it's Joel, Joel, at jglegalgroup.com.
And that's Joe at jglegalgroup.com, 887-6363. Now, you brought up a lot of information. A lot of people out there are not financial wizards. Certainly I'm not, and I don't do bankruptcy. And that's why I brought you on, and I bring on many talented attorneys that handle different areas of the law. That way we can bring out something. And also, if you're online, don't forget about www.mytexasbar.com. And also, if you can't afford an attorney, there's also great groups like the Rio Grande, the legal representation, the Texas Rio Grande, that they provide also legal representation through the Legal Referral Information Services here in Texas. But I strongly urge you to look at the Texas Bar Association. Call them up, and there are attorneys listed that handle these things, like Mr. Joel Gonzalez. So with that being said, we talked about, you brought up, we talked about what's exempt property, your cars, your house, they can't touch. People are going to try to remember that. What about secure and unsecured? What's the difference between secure and unsecured debt?
Well, in general terms, the difference between secured debt and unsecured debt is simply this. An unsecured debt, there's no collateral that the individual pledged to secure the loan. It's just a signature loan. Usually you have a little bit higher interest rates with unsecured loans, but basically what that means is if you were to file bankruptcy, the unsecured debt is simply that. If there's not enough money to pay, you can go forward because the debt itself wasn't secured by anything. If you have secured debt, and I'll use this example, specifically if it's a purchase money security agreement, and I know that's a fancy word, but the most common example of this is a vehicle. Everyone can associate with a vehicle loan because in that particular case, and there are other creditors out there that provide the same security agreement, for example, Conn's and Best Buy. And I didn't know this. Before I got into this business, I didn't know that if I buy something on credit at Conn's, on that credit application that you signed, there's a separate agreement, at least I found. In almost every case, there's a separate agreement that grants that store a security interest on the item itself, and this is an agreement before you even are approved in the credit application.
Well, I don't think a lot of people know about that. I mean, I wasn't aware of that. So would that be classified as unsecured or secured?
Well, that would be a secured loan.
Secured.
Now, an unsecured is typical of your Visa and MasterCard, where
credit cards.
Credit card debts. A lot of these loans at these payday loans, things like that, those are still may be considered secured, but you have the benefit. If you file bankruptcy, you can exempt certain property. If the security agreement that you signed, that's not a purchase money security agreement because you already owned the product before you got the loan. Okay. So there's a difference between a purchase money security agreement, which is a very strong type of secured loan, versus a typical secured loan. And here's the difference. If that secured loan impairs your constitutional right to exempt that property, well, guess what? The exemption is going to prevail because it's our state constitution, or in the case where you filed using the federal exemptions, well, the federal exemptions are going to trump that, and you can avoid those particular liens because of your right to utilize those exemptions.
And more, even more plain English, Joel, please, I'm drowning over here because, I mean, and you've broken it down. It's very complicated for the people out there. But for me that squeak by on payment systems and secure stuff, secure transactions, you know, the people out there who aren't legally trained, if we use a concrete example, I think that would be the best.
Okay.
Mr. and Mrs. Jones come in, and let's use a different example. They're making less than $40,000 a year. They've got a boatload of credit cards. They went to Lax and bought a bunch of furniture, gave Lax a good plug. And also, they have two trucks that they can't afford. The payments are like $900 a month. They're paying insurance. They got credit card people calling every day. And then one of the wonderful banking institutions here in town is calling them up and saying, you're about to lose your home. Okay. And let's break it down, secured, unsecured, that way, and purchase money agreements and all that. That way people will understand a little bit more.
Okay, well, that example sure has a lot of things going on.
Very hairy.
We have a foreclosure, which automatically I'm thinking of Chapter 13 if they have disposable income to at least make the minimum monthly mortgage payment. And, of course, they're going to have some extra money to pay towards the arrears because that's a secured, I mean, that's a mortgage.
They're behind on their payments. In other words, arrears, they owe like 3 months payment at least.
Right, and you can't wipe out a mortgage in bankruptcy. And there's policy reasons for that. If you were allowed to strip away the loan and the lien and you can keep the house outright, well, then nobody would be able to get a loan in the United States because the banks would fear, you know, I can't afford to lend it to everybody.
Every time I lend for a house, this guy's going to declare bankruptcy, and then we lose out.
And that's a policy reason why they don't allow that. The other thing that you mentioned in that example is that they may be behind on vehicles. Well, those are probably purchase money security agreements, unless they bought them with a credit card, which very few people do. But they're out there. I've had people.
I'll buy a Silverado. I'm putting it on my Visa. I mean, yeah, that's a little crazy.
And when that happens, as rare as it is, it's not secured, and you can actually eliminate the outstanding note because it wasn't secured by anything.
So if you have a $50,000 credit card out there, go buy a Lincoln.
Well, I wouldn't say that because, you know, the bankruptcy rules require that we take a glimpse 6 months back.
Okay.
Did you have the ability to pay? Was it considered a luxury good? You know, if you had the ability to, if you didn't have the ability to pay, and you bought this expensive luxury good or something that you didn't need, it's possible that the creditor will object to your bankruptcy and say that debt shouldn't be discharged because it was obtained through fraud or false pretenses or in an attempt to delay or defraud your creditor, and you don't want that to happen. But there are options. In a realistic example, like what you mentioned, they're behind on their vehicles, they're behind on their home 3 months, and that can happen at any point because people lose their jobs.
Yes.
They might be without a job for 3 or 4 months, and then they might find a job, but maybe that new job they found doesn't pay as much as their old job. So now the bank wants it all. You're 3 months behind. Well, we'll reinstate your note if you can pay us the $5,000 that you're behind. But guess what? Most debtors out there don't have $5,000 in the bank to pay that. One of the options is if they choose to file a Chapter 13, and by the way, a lot of the attorneys don't collect all of the upfront money because they also understand that the debtors, they don't have the full fee. So we actually put that in the bankruptcy plan. It's considered an administrative cost. But steer me back where I'm at. If you need to.
we were talking about secured and unsecured, you know, credit, and we're using that concrete example. Let me ask you, now that you've really fleshed it out for the public out there that didn't know what unsecured, we've learned what unsecured debt is for the most part. I mean, we can't sit here and do the laundry list. We've learned what secured is. And then also, we've seen what exempt assets are. So you become a mini bankruptcy expert a little bit here. And I'm learning as we're going along. Jordan out there is learning, our producer. And everybody out there, I want you all to remember one thing, that not only am I very grateful to have people like Mr. Gonzalez to come on, and you can reach him at 887-6363, but you can also benefit a lot from how to avoid bankruptcy. And so what we were talking about, your concrete example that you gave, let me ask you a question here.